The little village named Nagaro in Japan is slowly dying. Each one of these dolls that you see represents a person who's either dead or has left the village in search of a better life. One of the village members many years ago started making these dolls in order to fill up the space that was left behind, making the village one of the creepiest places ever. Imagine going for a walk in this village later in the night. Here's the thing, Nagaro isn't the only village in Japan that is dying. Japan has an aging population and has been a concern for the country for a very long time. However, this aging population is just a small piece of the puzzle when we look at the bigger issue that the Japanese economy faces. That's exactly what this video is about. In today's video, we look at how Japan is the United Kingdom of Asia. We also look at how Japan is better at being American than America itself. And finally, I say something that makes sense. This is the Japanese economy and you're watching the Breakdown Show. So let's get started. It is the 1970s, and the world is being taken over by the Japanese cars, electronics, and Hello Kitty. Even in America, Japanese brands like Sony, Panasonic, they were everywhere. They were common household names. In 1968, Japan had already taken over West Germany as the second biggest economy in the world. Back then, the Japanese economy was growing at the same rate as the student loans of some of the Americans today. The fact that Japan would take over America was not a if, but when. It was inevitable.
Yes, well done, but however.
Then came the 1980s, a decade that flipped the Japanese economy on its head. You see, in the 1980s, Japan witnessed and went through something called the Japanese asset price bubble. 3 acres of land in Tokyo, Japan was the same price as the entire state of California. That's how overpriced the things were. Now in Japan, due to very frequent earthquakes and the way the market is set up, an empty lot of land is worth more than one with a house on it.
Walls are bulldozed in during the night. Apartments broken into and vandalized so they can't be rented again.
The situation was so heated in Japan that some of the developers would hire Yakuza to go in a house, demolish it or damage it in order to force the people to sell these houses. Japan was turning into the wild west of the East. It wasn't just the real estate market that was in a bubble. Practically any asset within Japan was going up, and it was finally in the January of 1992 that the bubble popped. A lot of people lost their incomes, their savings, and what followed has been 30 years of head scratching and economists across the globe going, what the fuck? In order to really understand this 30 years of crisis, you have to really understand what makes the Japanese economy beautiful, sexy. And in order to understand that, we have to go back to the Japanese Industrial Revolution. Now, when I say the word Industrial Revolution, majority of the people watching this video will think about United Kingdom. That's where the Industrial Revolution happened. But here's the thing, Japan had its own Industrial Revolution. Now, according to a Japanese anthropologist, Japan and United Kingdom are very similar in many ways. First of all, they both experience temperate climate. Not too hot, not too cold, perfect for development. Secondly, both these countries are located far but yet close enough to mainland Eurasia, where they can absorb all the knowledge from the great civilizations of India, China, Middle East, and any other great civilization, but yet they're far enough where they're protected from a direct attack from any of these great civilizations. In 1868, Japan saw a political revolution, which overthrew the military government at the time and restored the Emperor Meiji as the main power in the country. And one of the biggest fears Emperor Meiji had was the fear of being colonized by the European powers. And due to this fear, right away, he declared that the country needs to industrialize at a breakneck speed, something that was held back by the last government. You see, this wasn't just something done by the capitalists or the entrepreneurs of the country. The government ensured prioritizing education with a prime focus on mathematics, science, and foreign languages. At the same time, the government pushed out many policies that promoted industrial progress. You see, Japan became the first country in the world to use this government-first approach towards industrialization. This approach since has been used by numerous countries like China, India, South Korea. Many countries have used this approach where the government is the key driver of the economic progress. You see, it is estimated that it took England 60 years to double its economy. America took another 50. Meanwhile, some of the fast-growing economies in Asia, like China, has been doubling its economy every 8 years. And this is all very much thanks to the Japanese approach. This period from 1868 to 1912, Japan went from being a small economy to a major player. The economy was big and resilient at this point. Even in 1920s, despite numerous small recessions and earthquakes, Japan still kept growing. However, there was a plot twist, and that plot twist came to be known as the Great Depression. The Great Depression decimated the Japanese economy. And as this is happening, a lot of the people in Japan start to believe that Japan needs to do exactly what some of the other European countries were doing at the time, that is to colonize and extract resources from elsewhere in order to keep their economy growing. Throughout the 1930s, many politicians, academics, and press tried to suppress this militarization of the country. However, by 1937, it became very clear that Japan was going down this path of militarization. By 1937, they invaded China. In 1941, as we all know, they attacked the Pearl Harbor and got into World War II. All of this militarization and participating in World War II made the Japanese economy from one of the forefront runners to an economy that needed rebuild. So how did Japan rebuild its economy, going from really broke in 1945 to being the second biggest economy in 1968? Here's the thing, even though Japan had lost World War II, it had a few things to look forward to. The main one being the revival of the political and democratic process within Japan. The militarization was over. The country now had a democracy. The other thing that kind of worked in their favor was the fact that Japan was taken over by Allied forces, at least on paper, at the end of World War II, much like Germany was, with Germany being divided amongst all four of the Allied forces. Japan in reality just had United States of America as the occupying force. This ensured that Japan was never divided and driven into a Cold War between USA and USSR. At the end of the war, it was predicted that Japan would see years of mass starvation and unemployment. However, Japan being Japan took the government-first approach. They were able to mitigate a lot of these issues that Japan was supposed to face. The government had the bright idea of putting a lot of the military men and people coming from former Japanese colonies to work in the fields, killing two birds with one stone, taking care of mass starvation and unemployment within no time. Apart from the very first year after the war, Japan never really saw that huge mass starvation or unemployment. Once the mass starvation and unemployment was taken care of, the government started working towards the overall restoration of the economy. They figured out a few key sectors like coal and steel and iron that were needed in order to revitalize the economy. Basically, the idea was that if the government steps in and ensures that there's plenty of these resources available for cheap, there will be a spillover effect into the rest of the economy, making sure all the other capitalists and entrepreneurs have plenty of these resources to go ahead and make products from. By the year 1950, just about 4 years from the World War II, Japan's economy was already starting to restore itself to a former glory. But how did the Japanese economy go from just being stable enough to being the second biggest? The year is 1950 and the Korean War breaks out. The North is supported by USSR and China, and the South is supported by USA. Now, USA was very far from South Korea, so they started using Japan as their base for supplying resources to this war effort. Now, a lot of the people will oversimplify things and kind of take away the credit from the Japanese people by saying this war is what enabled them to grow at a breakneck speed. In my opinion, yes, the Korean War did play a part in this, but it's more so the way the government and the people of Japan responded to this war that made them a great economy. In the 3 years after the war started, the world saw an increase in inflation rate, and Japan was perhaps the worst hit with this inflation. This increase in inflation made Japanese products very expensive, taking their competitive edge. The only source of income for Japan at that point had turned into this Korean War supply. The rest of the industry was struggling quite hard. They had basically three options in order to fix their economy at this point. Option one was to devalue yen, something that was frowned upon and seen as an embarrassing move for Japan. So that was never really considered as an option. Option two was that the government influences the economy by changing interest rates and trying to guide the economy in the right direction. And of course, Japanese government being Japanese government did exactly that. They continued doing that. However, it's the third option that really changed what the Japanese companies are today. Option 3 came from the word gorika, a Japanese word for improved efficiency through the use of technology and improving management of companies. While all these companies are trying to improve their productivity, the government also saw an opportunity and started giving incentives for this improved productivity through lowering the tariffs on new improved machinery and at the same time giving tax benefits if a company were to spend money on improving this productivity. And it's through this word Gorica that Japanese products became known as high quality and long lasting products across the world. So in many ways, it's actually the response of the Japanese government and the people to this Korean War that improved the Japanese economy, in many ways making Japan better at being a capitalist country than America itself. The other factors that helped Japan get into this high growth era was the private dynamism. People of Japan just have this inherent belief that whatever they produce needs to be produced at the best quality ever. And this same quality first approach is something that has been transferred over to the businesses of Japan, not just the individuals. In many ways, Japanese businesses aren't just focused on profits. Profit comes second, but quality and delivering the best product to the client is more important to them. Now, there's a reason that 80% of all the Toyota Corollas ever sold have outlived the person who bought them. The person who should be driving them is dead before the car is dead. Now, this is not based on facts, which is something I feel like is true. These cars just don't stop. Now, don't get me wrong, the Japanese firms obviously want profits, but they are trying to drive their profit not from the number of units sold, but number of return customers who come back because of the quality of the product was just so good. With all the right steps being taken at the government level, the business level, and even the people who work in these companies having the right mindset, Japanese economy was just growing way faster than anyone had ever hoped for. By 1968, and as I previously mentioned, they had already surpassed West Germany. However, things were going to change. The 1980s were going to bring about a lot of hardship on the Japanese economy, and these were brought upon them by mainly two factors, and one of them being the government's poor decisions. Decisions that could have been right, but they turned out to be wrong. Let's look at them. The first was the deregulation of the Japanese banks. You see, in Japan, as long as the Japanese banks followed the guidelines set forward by the Ministry of Finance, they were guaranteed to make profits. However, as soon as they were deregulated, a lot of the Japanese firms that were previously using Japanese firms for financing had access to other sources of money. They could just borrow money from anywhere. This meant the Japanese banks were now making less of a profit. Now they were more incentivized to just dish out loans, poor loans, and bad loans to people in order to keep being profitable. Something the American economy did in 2008, the Japanese economy was doing it throughout the 1980s and 1990s. This increased giving out of loans is what led to this bad economic bubble. Everyone just had access to practically free money, and that is where the bubble started. The other thing that really crushed the Japanese economy were the Plaza Accords. You see, in 1980s, American dollar, which was used as the global currency, was appreciating a lot, which meant the top 5 economies of the world weren't quite happy about it. For example, let's say England wants to buy a Japanese machine that costs $4, which is, let's say, 8 British pounds. By 1985, the same machine is costing them 16 British pound, even though it is still $4 per machine. You see, this appreciation of US dollar meant everyone else was struggling to do trade between each other. And as part of the Plaza Accord, the American dollar would be artificially deflated in order to keep the economies just working fine.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
On the surface, it looks like a terrible idea for Japan. If American dollar is devalued, the Japanese products, which are being sold to their number one customer, that is America, will be pricier for these same people. That means they can't sell as many of these products. So why did the Japanese government agree to it? They were hoping that the decrease in sales to America would be made up for by the increase by selling to Europe and the rest of the world. And of course, that's not how things turned out. Within a year from signing this accord, the growth rate of Japan went from 4.4% to 2.9%, practically going half. Now, of course, the Bank of Japan responded by decreasing the interest rate, which again didn't help the asset bubble that was building at the time. Now, from 1985 to 1992, the government tried playing this balancing role of just increasing or changing the interest rate enough where it doesn't increase the asset bubble size, but at the same time stimulates the economy, which is practically impossible to do. And that's what happened. By 1992, the asset bubble was just so big, the government had to increase the interest rate, which led to the popping of the bubble. But what explains the 30 years of stagnation and deflation and the stagnant wages across Japan? Since then, the government of Japan has tried everything that's practically possible. The Japanese government reduced the interest rates down to zero, and at one point it was even in negative. Basically, it would cost you money to try and save money, but that didn't stimulate the economy. The government even went on a spending spree and making infrastructure just trying to stimulate the economy. Even that failed. When that failed, people were just baffled what's happening. Now, a lot of the economists were not sure what's happening, and the answer perhaps lies in what is known as a liquidation trap. Liquidation trap is something majority of the economists thought was a thing of the past. It just doesn't happen in today's globalized economies. Turns out it does, and it happened in Japan. Now, you may be wondering, what is a liquidation trap? Basically, in a liquidation trap, people and the businesses have come to the realization that regardless of what a thing costs today, due to the deflation, it's just going to cost less tomorrow. And perhaps even further less if they wait another year or longer. And that mindset makes it practically impossible for any kind of monetary policy to stimulate an economy. People just won't spend the money. And that's the main reason why Japan's economy has seen a lot of stagnation and deflation. Today, Japan is not number 2. If anything, they've lost their spot to multiple countries. These demographic trends that tend to be in the news all the time seem to take away from the real issues at hand. You see, these demographic trends are valid for all other G7 countries as well. Majority of them have an aging population. So why is it so bad for Japan? And don't even get me started on how cumbersome doing business in Japan has become. There are certain government forms that need you to make your submission on a floppy disk. All the way up until a month ago, you still needed a floppy disk. Nobody even makes a floppy disk. In summary, the 30 years of stagnation that Japan has gone through is a direct result of some of the bad decisions made by the government. Also a direct result of the declining age of the country. Now, to be honest, the government could just open up immigration, something Japan is really opposed to fix this. I mean, a key thing I forgot to mention in the video is the government has been making certain right decisions, but the issue with the liquidation trap is it's in the mind of the people. Till it doesn't move out of people's mind, the situation doesn't drastically change. But that is something that has been recently changing. So there's a lot to look forward to in the Japanese economy in the coming few years because it seems to be coming back. So we'll see how it goes. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time. Peace.